So, there's an ancient Chinese proverb that goes something like, may you live in interesting times. And it's been comically used as a curse and a blessing. It's actually quite interesting when you start thinking about it, because the question really is, do you want to live in interesting times, or do you want to live in stable times? And I think that the ancient Chinese who uttered that was probably happy that he was living in stable times and was wishing, quote unquote, interesting times as more of a negative thing. But that really always stuck with me, because there's no doubt about it that 2026 would definitely qualify as interesting times. But how interesting is the modern era that we live in, especially if you compare it to every era before it? And so I did a bit of research on kind of anthropological statistics, let's call it an anthropological census, and figured out how many humans lived ever. So the consensus around this is like 117, 118 billion. Obviously, nobody knows, because they were not conducting censuses back then, and it's very difficult to tell because archaeological remains are still being dug up. Many of them were lost. But I think 118 billion is a good number, conservative number. Actually, I think it's more than that, but it's a conservative number. And we're only dating this to about 200,000 years. So we're taking the most modern, anatomically modern humans, not our more distant ancestors, which, if you included that, would obviously be a bigger number. But about 200,000 BCE, or I guess it would be 198,000 BCE, 200,000 years ago, till now, roughly 118 billion people have walked the earth. Now, there are roughly 8 billion people living today, right? And that's obviously because the world is capable of housing far more people today because of the way we produce food and the way we produce energy and the way that we produce food, because that's the main thing that allows us to sustain this population, which just is not imaginable a couple hundred years ago, let alone a couple thousand years ago. So you do have one of the largest, if the largest, people walking the earth right now, but it's still a small percentage of the entire history of humans. And when you look at it in that perspective, something very interesting comes up, because you start to think the average person, for the vast majority, 99% of history, human history only, not even planetary history, just human history, lived through absolutely no change. Now, don't get me wrong. Between 200,000 BCE and today, tremendous things have happened. The invention of agriculture, the invention of kind of nation states or empires, the invention of weapons, like literally, the invention of writing, the invention of medicine. There's no shortage of incredible things that the ancient civilizations did, or even before them did. However, they happened at a glacial pace. We're talking about these inventions, these really robust changes happening over thousands of years, each of them. The average lifespan until 100 years ago was less than 40 years old globally. So you lived your biological lifespan 40 years. The rate of change for these seismic events, a millennia, multiple millennia. And that's why when that Chinese philosopher said, may you live in interesting times, he's just saying, hey, don't get caught up in that middle period. But the majority of you are going to not ever be caught up in that middle period. And compare that to today. I would draw the line at about 1750, because I think that really kicks off where the Industrial Revolution gets into full gear. And the Industrial Revolution is obviously this black swan event, but this kind of remarkable anomaly in history where the progress that humans just went parabolic, if not linear up. We'll do another video on some of the statistics about the Industrial Revolution, but if you just take 1750 to today, roughly 16 billion people, something around there, have lived. And we know much more about these people because there were censuses and people, modern history and modern tooling. So these 16 or so billion people lived through remarkable change, like brain-numbing change, right? From the point of the Industrial Revolution until 2026, the world has changed way more and at a pace and a velocity that is just staggering compared to the previous 190,000 years, 199,000 years. And whereas the biological lifespan used to be 40 years and change used to happen at a 1,000-year cycle, today the biological lifespan is actually probably 70 years, roughly speaking, and increasing. And change is happening what feels like every day, but at least you can say every year. In the course of a decade, the world looks completely different. And so humans have had to adjust, and you literally live in that kind of the dystopian fantasy of that Chinese philosopher, which is you live in the most interesting times. You live in times so interesting, it's incomprehensible. And literally, I don't mean incomprehensible meaning it's staggering. Incomprehensible means nobody knows what's going on. It's changing that fast. And so one of the things that I take a great solace in is A, this is interesting times, let's make the best of it. But B, you have to be good at unlearning things and learning again. Because the ancient memory, which regulates evolution, even like social evolution, is glacial, slow, as it should be. You don't want evolution just changing things every day. But the societal and technological evolution is literally at the speed of light at this point. And so we have to adapt ourselves to that, and we have to embrace that, or else we will be gripped with the anxiety that everything is changing at a pace that we can't control. That's obvious. And now it's an opportunity as opposed to a detriment to be able to lean into that, because those who can unlearn and learn will be the masters of the new world. And so I guess I'll end this video saying, may you live in interesting times.